was standing in the kitchen, frosting the cake I'd been working on since 5 that morning, my hands shaking just a little more than usual, not from the arthritis, but from the nerves I couldn't explain. It was Liam's birthday, his 7th to be exact, and I'd been planning the dinosaur-themed cake with him for weeks. He wanted chocolate, extra fudge, and green icing that looked like moss on rocks, because apparently, dinosaurs didn't just eat meat, they lived in jungles. I let him have his creative input, as I always did, because making him feel heard was one of the small gifts I could still offer him. That boy has a mind like a sponge and a heart big enough to make you cry on a random Tuesday. And he still calls me Grammy, like it's the first word he ever learned. Sometimes I think it was. I arrived at the house an hour before the guests were set to show up, juggling the heavy cake carrier and a bag full of party supplies, just in case Melanie forgot napkins again, like she had for Liam's 5th. She didn't open the door when I rang the bell, Greg did, distracted and phone in hand, barely mumbling a hello before disappearing into the living room. No, thank you for coming early, or the cake smells amazing, just a quick glance and gone. I set the cake down gently on the kitchen island, took a deep breath, and walked into the chaos of half-blown balloons and unopened decorations. Liam wasn't in sight, but I could hear his voice from the backyard, laughing that same bright, bubbling laugh he's had since he was a baby. Melanie came in about 10 minutes later, dressed up in a way that made me wonder who she was trying to impress. Tight jeans, 2 high heels for a backyard party, and makeup she usually didn't bother with. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, the kind people give when they're pretending they don't hate your guts, and she barely acknowledged the cake. Instead, she went straight to rearranging the store-bought cupcakes she must have picked up as a backup. I remember standing there confused, feeling like a guest in the house I once paid the mortgage on. It used to be mine, you know. Long time ago, before I signed it over to them during that messy year when Melanie had Liam and Greg had no job and I had a retirement fund just sitting there, collecting dust. More people began to arrive, friends from school, neighbors I barely recognized, a few of Greg's family who still treat me like I'm the ghost of a bad decision. I didn't mind, though. I was there for Liam and Liam only. When he finally saw me, he ran so fast I thought he'd trip over his untied sneakers. He threw his arms around me and yelled, "Grammy, you made the Dino cake." And that moment right there? That was worth everything I'd gone through this past year. Worth the sleepless nights, the unpaid bills, the lonely holidays. The party carried on with the usual chaos, kids screaming, adults drinking too much lemonade spiked with vodka, and parents pretending they didn't hear their kids calling each other, but faces. I stayed mostly in the background, helping when needed, keeping an eye on Liam so he didn't fall off the trampoline again like last summer. And then, right when it was time to cut the cake, it happened. Melanie called everyone around, made a big show of announcing the cake was so cute, and thank you to my mom, I guess, for making it. People chuckled politely. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I've learned that silence can humiliate louder than yelling. Liam blew out his candles and everyone clapped, but Melanie wasn't done. She turned to one of Greg's sisters, Melissa, I think, and said it loud enough for the whole backyard to hear. Honestly, she's not really family. She's just the free babysitter we can't seem to get rid of. It was like the sound got sucked out of the air for a moment. Even the music seemed to pause. I heard a plastic cup crunch in someone's hand. Someone coughed. And me? I didn't say a damn word. I walked over to Liam, bent down and kissed his forehead. I whispered, "You're going to do great things, sweetheart. Don't forget how much I love you." He didn't understand why I said it that way, but he smiled and nodded like he always does when he's trying to understand adult stuff. I stood up, walked past Melanie, and didn't look back. I left the cake, the decorations, the napkins I brought, even the backup candles I always carry in case they forget to buy any. I got in my car, closed the door, and sat there with the engine off for 10 straight minutes. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat with the weight of her words sitting in my chest like concrete. She didn't say I wasn't helpful. She didn't say I overstepped. No, she said I wasn't family. Just the free babysitter. And the thing about free things? People don't value them until they're gone. I drove away with no plan, no destination, and no clear sense of what I would do next. But I'll tell you one thing, I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel defeated. I felt like something had finally snapped loose, like a rope that had been slowly fraying for years. I walked out with my dignity intact, and a plan forming in the back of my mind. I didn't start keeping score until it was already too late to win the game, and by then I'd been too tired to care about the points anyway. But now, sitting in my quiet little apartment with nobody knocking on my door except for the mailman and my neighbor's bratty grandkid asking if I have any more of those cookies with the little peanut butter middles, I have the time and the space to remember. Not just remember, but count. Count all the damn ways I gave and gave and gave to people who saw me as background noise. They don't remember what I've done, but I do. My memory's still good, sharp like a box cutter. You don't notice it's there until it slices you open. Liam was barely 2 weeks old the first time Melanie called me in the middle of the night, sobbing because Greg had forgotten to pick up diapers and she couldn't leave the house because the baby was asleep and she didn't know what to do. I was there in 20 minutes, hair still damp from the shower, coat thrown over my nightgown, and a pack of diapers in one hand and a rotisserie chicken in the other because I figured if she couldn't get diapers, she probably hadn't eaten either. That was the night it started, the first of hundreds of emergencies that weren't emergencies at all, just signs that she wasn't ready for motherhood, and he sure as hell wasn't ready to be anyone's partner in it. Over the years, I picked Liam up from school probably 200 times. That's like, 25 years of pickups? I was there on snow days, half days, teacher work days, and the days Melanie and Greg both forgot. He had early dismissal. I was the one who packed him a lunch when he was too embarrassed to eat the cafeteria spaghetti, because the last time he did he got teased for the smell. I made him turkey and cheese roll-ups with little notes inside, like, "You're my brave explorer," or, "The jungle needs you, Dr. Dino." He kept them in a shoebox in his room. I found it once when I was cleaning and cried in the laundry room for 20 straight minutes. When Liam had strep throat, who sat beside him with the cold compress and the ice chips? When he needed a costume for his kindergarten play and Melanie didn't want to spend the money, who stayed up sewing dinosaur scales out of shiny green fabric until her fingers cramped up? When Greg got laid off that one year and they couldn't pay for Christmas presents, who pulled $500 out of her emergency savings and wrapped each gift like it was from Santa himself. There were so many times I let myself get pushed to the back of the line, justifying it by telling myself, it's for Liam, not for them. And it was. Every time. But after a while, the difference between sacrifice and stupidity gets harder to see, especially when you're the only one still showing up. I skipped my own dentist appointment so Melanie could afford Liam's dance lessons. I walked to the pharmacy in the rain when his inhaler ran out because Melanie was too tired to drive and Greg was stuck in traffic, even though I heard video game sounds in the background of his call. And still, slowly but surely, Melanie's tone started to shift. She went from, "Thank you so much, Mom," to, "Why are you always around?" From, "I don't know what I'd do without you," to, "You're too involved." It's confusing for Liam. I brushed it off at first, told myself she was just stressed, that maybe I was hovering too much, even though I never once crossed the line she herself hadn't erased 100 times. She wanted help, demanded it even, but when I became too convenient, she started to resent me for being there. One time, not long before the birthday party, I heard her tell someone on the phone, "I don't know, she just inserts herself into everything." That stung, because I don't insert myself, I fill the holes they leave behind. But I guess that doesn't matter when people are too selfish to notice you're holding the whole damn thing together. The worst part is, I started to shrink myself to fit the new narrative. I stopped giving opinions, stopped offering help unless directly asked, stopped reminding Melanie of doctor appointments or sending Greg friendly texts about Liam's school projects. And you know what happened? They still blamed me when things went wrong. They still expected me to show up and clean up after their messes, but God forbid I asked for a thank you. I remember one night, Liam asked why I was leaving so quickly after dropping off dinner. I told him I was just tired. He looked at me with that serious face kids get when they're trying to solve a grown-up puzzle, and he said, "I think Mommy's mad at you." But I'm not. I love you, Grammy. I hugged him for too long and cried in my car the whole way home. So when Melanie stood there at that party and said I wasn't family, just the free babysitter, I realized something I should have figured out years ago. They never saw me as a grandmother, just a convenient tool. And like any tool, once I got a little rust on me, I became disposable. They thought I'd never leave because I had no one else. But they forgot. I've got more than just them. I didn't slam the door when I left the birthday party, didn't curse, didn't throw the cake in the trash, or dump the punch bowl on the ground like some dramatic movie grandmother, though God knows that would have felt good for a few seconds. I just walked away with the kind of quiet that terrifies people more than any screaming ever could, because silence carries truth like a knife carries weight. It cuts deep when it finally lands. But before I turned the key in the ignition and backed out of their driveway for what I figured might be the last time, I remembered the envelope still tucked inside my purse, warm from sitting there all afternoon, soft from the number of times I'd taken it out and considered destroying it. I didn't destroy it, though. I placed it exactly where I knew it would eventually be found. The guest bathroom upstairs was always the one nobody used unless they ran out of toilet paper or someone needed a quiet place to cry at a party, and Melanie kept her spare hand towels in the cabinet beneath the sink. I slipped the envelope behind the stack of floral-printed towels, third shelf down, because Liam was a curious kid and I'd seen him sneak in there before when he got overwhelmed by noise. It wouldn't happen right away, but one day he'd go poking around in there again, maybe bored, maybe hiding, maybe just looking for something of mine, and that envelope would be waiting, just like I've always been waiting for them to see me clearly. Inside it was a letter, handwritten in blue ink, not typed, because I wanted whoever opened it to hear my voice in every word. My cursive is a little shaky now, but I still remember how my own mother used to write notes to tuck into my lunchbox when I was 10 and afraid of everything. That kind of tenderness stays with you, even after decades of being ignored and cast aside. Along with the letter was a copy of a legal document I never thought I'd use, but always knew I might have to. It was dated 6 years ago, notarized, signed, sealed, and legitimate. It gave me temporary guardianship of Liam, issued by the county court after Melanie abandoned her child for 5 months and nobody could find her. Greg had been the one who called me, voice shaking, telling me she was just gone and that he didn't know how to feed a baby, let alone change diapers or warm a bottle without scalding the poor boy's mouth. He'd never even held Liam alone until that night. I showed up with formula, clean clothes, and enough grit to make it through the darkest season of my life, because Liam needed me, and that was enough. Melanie turned up eventually, hair shorter, eyes hollow, wearing the same clothes from a week earlier and reeking of gin. She said it was postpartum depression, said she didn't remember leaving, said she was getting help, and I believed her, not because she deserved that trust, but because Liam deserved his mother. The paperwork sat in a drawer ever since, like an emergency flare I never lit, even though sometimes I should have. Every time Melanie said I was just the babysitter, I bit my tongue. Every time Greg said, "We've got it under control," while handing me Liam and heading out for drinks, I kept my mouth shut. But now they'd pushed me too far, made it too clear that I was never more than a backup plan to them, a stand-in, a warm body for their cold priorities. The letter I left wasn't angry. I didn't curse or point fingers, even though both were deserved. I wrote about how much I love Liam, how proud I am of the boy he's becoming, how I hope he never forgets the sound of my laugh, or the way we used to dance in the kitchen to old Motown records while waiting for cookies to cool. I reminded him that love doesn't always come in pretty packages, that sometimes the people who love you most do so from the shadows, carrying burdens you'll never know existed. And I told him the truth quietly, but clearly, that his parents once left him, and I did not. I signed it, "Forever your Grammy," then slid the papers together, sealed the envelope, and hid it away like a time capsule made not of trinkets, but of truth. Then I walked out of their house, my house once, though nobody seemed to remember that either, and I didn't look back. Back in my car, The air smelled like frosting and betrayal, sweet and bitter all at once. I drove home with my hands steady and my spine straighter than it had been in years, because I finally knew I wasn't just reacting, I was moving forward with purpose. And purpose feels a hell of a lot better than resentment. By the time they found the envelope, I'd already cut them off from the one thing they thought they owned. The thing about silence is, once you learn to live inside it, it starts to sound a lot like freedom. My apartment's not big, just a little two-bedroom on the edge of town, with carpets that have seen better days and a dishwasher that sounds like it's arguing with itself, but it's mine. Not borrowed space, not someone else's basement, not a corner of a house where you're tolerated more than welcomed. Mine. The coffee table is covered in papers now, thick manila folders filled with forms that nobody ever wants to deal with until it's too damn late. And every time I sign one, initial a line, or staple two sheets together, I feel lighter, like I'm finally laying bricks on the boundary I should have built years ago. There's a certain peace in paperwork, in knowing you've taken back control from the people who thought you'd never leave. After the party, after leaving that envelope behind, I went home and called my lawyer. Not some hotshot guy with an office downtown, just an old friend named Alice who helped me with a will a few years back and never once treated me like I was senile or stupid. I told her everything about the guardianship papers, about the insult, about the feeling in my gut that this was going to get uglier before it got better. She didn't hesitate. "Let's lock it down," she said, and we did. School pickup rights? Removed. Medical emergency contact? Changed. Access to Liam's school records, health updates, extracurricular activities? Gone. All of it rerouted through her, a legal firewall between me and the chaos I knew was coming. I didn't think I'd hear from them so soon, but 2 mornings after the party, there they were, standing outside my apartment like a sad little scene from some soap opera I'd stopped watching when life got hard. I saw them through the peephole before they knocked, Melanie with her arms wrapped tight around her stomach like she was physically trying to hold in her regret, Greg standing behind her with a face caught somewhere between anger and confusion, and Liam, God bless him, looking up at the window like maybe I was watching from behind the curtains. I was. I always am. They knocked once. Then again. Then harder. Melanie's voice cracked as she called my name, not Mom, not Mother, just Linda, like that might carry more weight now than it ever did when she used it to sign me up for babysitting duty without asking. She said they needed to talk, said there had been a misunderstanding, said they didn't mean it like that, which is the kind of thing people say when the words they meant come back to bite them. Greg didn't say much, just shifted his weight and muttered something under his breath that I'm sure was meant to sound like sympathy, but came off more like guilt playing dress-up. Liam sniffled, wiped his nose with his sleeve, and stared straight at the door. And still, I didn't open it. I didn't open it because just the day before, I'd gotten a call from Alice saying Melanie had already tried to challenge the guardianship in court. Thought she could go down to the county courthouse and file some paperwork, claim I was overstepping, maybe even accuse me of meddling in ways that weren't legally mine to meddle in. But when the clerk pulled her records, because of course they did, that's how this works, it all came up. The 5-month disappearance. The previous dependency report. The flagged CPS note from when Liam was 6 months old and Melanie dropped him at daycare without food, formula, or even diapers. The case that was closed only because I intervened. And just like that, any idea of her being the wronged mother fell apart like wet cardboard. The law isn't always fair, but this time, it was prepared. So while they cried on my porch, I sat in my recliner with a mug of lukewarm coffee, watching the steam rise like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. I didn't hate them. That's the hardest part to explain. I didn't hate Melanie or Greg, or even the version of myself that had allowed them to use me like a damn spare tire for all those years. What I felt was something colder, something cleaner resolve. And a kind of grief that doesn't scream anymore, just sighs and moves on. I watched Liam press his tiny hand against the glass of the screen door, and for a second, just 1 second, I almost opened it. Almost. But then I remembered what she said at the party, in front of her friends, in front of strangers, and worst of all, in front of Liam. I wasn't family. I was just the free babysitter. So I turned away from the door, turned off the porch light, and let the silence answer for me. I saw Liam's face through the glass, and I almost opened the door. But then I remembered what she said. I wasn't family. Everyone thinks the birthday party was the thing that made me leave. That one final straw snapping under the weight of years of small betrayals and colder shoulders. But truth be told, I'd already started packing up long before that Saturday. What they didn't know, what they still probably can't wrap their heads around, is that I didn't walk away because of what Melanie said to me in front of her friends. I walked away because of something she said when she didn't know I was listening. That's what broke me, and that's what made everything after it fall into place faster than anyone could stop it. It happened about a month before the party, on one of those long, dragging Wednesday afternoons when I'd picked Liam up from school because Melanie claimed she had a migraine and Greg, as usual, was stuck at work, though I later found out he was golfing with some vendor buddy. I was upstairs in their guest room folding Liam's clothes because he liked it when I put the socks in little pairs that looked like faces, and I guess the door must have been cracked open just enough. I heard them talking downstairs, not yelling, just that low, half-hushed tone people use when they're not worried about being heard because the person they're talking about is supposed to be too old, too deaf, or too stupid to matter. I was none of those things. Greg said something like, "She's here too much, it's getting weird," and Melanie, in that flippant voice she uses when she's pretending to joke about something she's dead serious about, said, "I know." I was actually thinking, maybe it's time we looked into a place for her. A place. Not a guest house. Not a little apartment of her own. A place, as in, a facility, a home, a quiet little corner of someone else's care where inconvenient grandmothers go when they're no longer useful or cute enough to keep around. Greg didn't protest. He didn't laugh. He just said, would free up the guest room, and then they changed the subject to takeout. Chinese or Mexican. I stood in that hallway, socks in my hand, listening to the muffled sound of my usefulness being measured against square footage and whether my existence was too much of a burden to their lifestyle. That was the moment. Not the party, not the court battle, not even the door I didn't open. That hallway, those words, those socks, I could still feel the cotton in my palm, warm from the dryer, soft from years of wear. That was when something inside me folded, not like paper, but like steel, like a hinge locking into place. From that day forward, I started preparing. Quietly, methodically, with the kind of patience that only a woman in her 60s who's been overlooked her whole life can truly harness. I called Alice, the lawyer, and started transferring assets, my name off anything that could tie me to their mess, their finances, their drama. I moved what little savings I had into an account they couldn't touch and updated my will to ensure that Liam would still get what I'd set aside for him, but only when he turned 18. I started documenting things, conversations, calendars, texts, emails. I even started recording audio when I was over there, not because I planned on using it, but because it gave me peace to know that, this time, I had proof. And I wrote letters. 10 of them. One for every birthday Liam would have between now and when he turned 17, tucked into a weatherproof box I sealed with tape and stored in a friend's attic. Each one starts the same. Dear Liam, I love you more than you'll ever know. Some of them are short, just a memory or a joke we used to share. Others are longer, full of stories he might forget, like the time he insisted we wear matching aprons to bake cookies, or when he fell asleep on my lap at the zoo while the lions roared in the distance. I wanted him to have something of me that nobody else could edit or explain away. Tonight, I sat on my old couch, surrounded by papers and a cup of chamomile tea going cold, and I read the letter I wrote for his 10th birthday. It talks about how brave he is, how his heart is his greatest strength, how even when the world doesn't make sense, he should never lose the gentleness that makes him shine. I told him that love can come from anywhere, but real love doesn't flinch when things get hard. It just gets quieter and steadier, like the ocean after a storm. And here's the part that hurts the most: I miss him. Every damn day. I miss the sound of his feet on the stairs, the way he'd ask me if T-Rexes would have liked pancakes, the way he always reached for my hand in